These unconventional times require unconventional conversations. Listen in as your host, Richard Gordon, engages in one-on-one conversations with numerous leaders, elected officials, politicians, and others to learn what's happening in your state, on the Hill, and across America. Now, here's the host of Unconventional Times, Richard Gordon.
Hello and welcome to Unconventional Times. I'm your host, Richard Gordon, and thank you for joining us today. The Trump administration has had some huge wins lately. Whether you like it or not, whether you like the president or not, whether you agree or not, whether you like what's in the bill or not, there's no way that one can argue that the passage of his major piece of legislation is not a political and legislative accomplishment. And there's so much in it, so much in the bill that changes so many aspects of American life. There are provisions that change health care, child care, food for poor children, assistance to the environment, increases aid for defense, it increases aid to ICE and the border, and it even changes the way we tax tips and overtime. There's no one better to talk about all of this, and what's going on in the country. So let's get right to it. John Faso is a Republican from New York State. He was a leader of the New York State Assembly for many years, the Republican nominee for governor of New York, and a congressman from the 19th District of the state of New York. So, Congressman Faso, welcome to Unconventional Times.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. And thanks also for not saying that I got crushed when I ran for governor of New York in 2006. I ran against a guy named Eliot Spitzer, who didn't last very long in office, but in that election in 2006, I was crushed. So, but it was a good experience nonetheless, and I learned a lot from it. The biggest lesson was I should not have run that year.
Well, it was a good Democratic year, so I think anyone would have been in your position.
Right.
You'll never remember this. I know you'll never remember this, but about 3 or 4 days before the election, since you brought it up, about 3 or 4 days before the election, you and I had dinner with our dear friend Bill Plunkett, and I remember after the dinner walking out with you and saying something to the effect, because we both knew what was coming, saying to you, the courage and strength it takes to run a race where you know what's going to happen, but to do it with grace and dignity, and also to raise issues that were important. And what you did in 2008 was very important. Yeah, you got crushed, but you did something important. You really did.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for reminding me because I had forgotten. But and Bill Plunkett was a great friend, both of us, and I
Great
really
man.
I think it was probably about 6 or 7 weeks before the election where I realized, holy smoke, the writing is on the wall. And it turned out he had 36 million and I had 4 million. So guess
Right.
what? No one even knew I was running. And
Right.
and I would have these folks, Republican partisans from different parts of the state, and they would get in touch with my campaign and say, why isn't he running more TV commercials? And I told them the answer is, well, it takes money. If you'd like to send money right now, we'll gladly appreciate your support. But it's people have this misnomer. It's a misnomer. They think that, okay, you have the party support, and therefore there's this phalanx of people that arise and all the money just comes in. It doesn't work that way.
It
And
doesn't work that way.
no, and also, let's face it, this is kind of like I make an analogy to going to the racetrack, and a lot of money gets bet on the 2-to-1 odds. Not as much money gets bet on the 20 to
No.
1 odds, and that's just the way it is in politics. People are reluctant, even if they may agree with you, they're reluctant to put their money down on someone they think doesn't really have that much of a chance to win. So, but it was important, and I felt it really was important. I had a few misfortunes in that campaign. The one that always comes back to me was it was early October, and that I was debating Eliot Spitzer in the public TV station in Buffalo, and there was a studio audience of about 100 people, and this would have been my opportunity to get people to pay attention, particularly in Western New York, where that debate would have been seen. I realized once we agreed to the date that was also a date that Channel 17, or Channel 13, the public TV station in New York City, had some live from the Met or something like that scheduled, and there was no way they were going to stop doing
Turn you
that
on.
and
Yeah.
turn this debate on. So I was debating, and then about 10 after 8, I noticed the lights flickered in the studio. And I wondered what that was, and then I immediately forgot about it and went on with the debate, where I think I did really well in that debate, and Eliot said so afterwards as well to the press. And it turned out that was the night they had a terrific early October storm in Buffalo. The leaves were still on the trees, and the power went out all over Western New York. So no one in Western New York even saw that debate. So it was the kind of thing that the luck wasn't with me that time.
It's what makes politics so interesting and so hard to predict, because things like this just happen and we have no
Right.
control. You have a very unusual record. Um, you ran twice for offices that you ended up losing, but the guy who beat you in each of those two races both resigned shortly thereafter. So
Yeah.
it's a little
Uh,
unusual.
Yeah, I ran against Alan Hevesy in 2002 for state controller. That was a race where I raised and spent 7.5 million, still the most anyone's ever
Wow.
raised and spent in a state controller race. And Hevesy he beat me by 3 points. And
You were
unfortunately,
way behind for a long time. You closed
well,
that gap.
it was closed, but we had things we had some good support around the state, and Ed Koch did an ad for me in that I showed in the New York metropolitan area. He didn't like Alan Hevesy very much, and
No mayor
uh,
of New York likes the city controller.
that's right. And but he turned out to be a good friend of mine, and I enjoyed really getting to know him after that election because we appeared on a couple of cable TV shows together. But he didn't like Alan Hevesy, and that was probably the main reason he supported me. But that was a close race, and it's really too bad what happened to Alan Hevesy. He had to resign his office, and
Right.
Spitzer, of course, had to resign his office too. Hevesy was actually convicted
Right. I
of
remember. Sure.
misappropriation of state funds, but it was really tragic for him and his family, and it was not good for the people of the state either.
It's just a strange coincidence it's happened to you twice. So let's move on to
Sure.
Trump's big bill. You were a member of Congress. You were there. You voted on similar things. I'd really love your take on what you think about it.
Well, I think by and large, the proponents and the opponents of the bill exaggerate its impact, and so I think they both do that. I think it was really important for President Trump and Republicans to get the tax bill passed. And basically, the tax bill is an extension of what was done in 2017. Ironically, I voted against the
You
tax
voted. I was going
bill.
to ask you about that because you were one of only
No,
12 Republicans to vote
yeah,
against it.
and it was strictly because I feared the impact of the abrupt termination of the SALT deduction, or the
Uh-huh.
limitation of it to $10,000, and what that would do to New York State. And I think my fear came true. I felt that it would help drive a lot of people, particularly successful and more affluent people, out of the state. Um, but we're seeing this is broadly happening over the last 10 years or so in New York. I think 1.7 million people have left New York, more than any other state except California, but many more proportionally because California is much more populous than New York. So I was fearful. While I supported the vast majority of what was in that tax bill in 17, I thought that it was just simply unfair, and not necessarily so much for my district, but I felt that especially downstate, it would exacerbate the trend of people leaving New York. So I cast a no vote. candidly, if because I knew we were going to pass that bill, if my vote had been a determining factor, I probably would have voted yes.
Oh,
But I
really?
felt it was
Interesting.
important to make a statement about the impact of the SALT deduction. Now, the issue was because of the budget reconciliation rules, and I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on that, but because of those rules, much of the tax bill in 2017 that was enacted had expiration dates because they have to make it fit within a 10-year financial
Oh,
window.
as does this one.
But most of the tax bill was made permanent and in this bill. And I think the back to the question of my thoughts about this bill, I think that it was really important that certain things be made permanent, that the rate reductions, but particularly things like expensing for business investment, so that you're not having to do a long tail depreciation, but you can immediately deduct your investments in new machinery and equipment, capital investments that are made. I think that's really important for the economy. The thing that investors and business people, job creators, that's what we're talking about, people that create jobs, the thing that's really important for them is certainty. And having the certainty of the permanence of these provisions was really important. We spend a lot of time, and the media spend a lot of time talking about really kind of extraneous small things in this tax bill. The no tax on tips, which is actually narrowly constructed over time. Those kind of things, they really are small potatoes when you look at the big picture of the tax bill. So I think that both the rate reductions and the business tax provisions are really beneficial and are going to help the economy. One of the sidelights of this, we lost Congress in the 2018 election, and we lost 41 seats, and I was one of those seats that lost to their Democratic opponent. One of the reasons was that by the time we passed the tax bill at the end of 2017, it was too late to get the full benefit of that tax bill felt in the economy by the election in 2018. And one mistake the Republicans did not make this time is they passed that tax bill by the 4th of July. And so the benefits of the extension of those tax provisions is going to be more immediately felt. And in terms of the election in 2026, that's a sufficient time for the benefit of those provisions to be felt throughout the economy. So the long and short of it, I think that the passage of the tax bill in reconciliation was the single most important thing that they were able to accomplish. And I think that that's going to manifest real benefits. And when you hear Democrats say, oh, this is a tax break for the rich and everything like that, and then you go through, oh, do you want to return to the alternative minimum tax, which, oh, by the way, took away the bulk of the state and local tax deduction? Or do you want to have rate increases for middle class and upper income taxpayers? Well, when the Democrats will always say, well, make the rich pay their fair share. They never say what the fair share is. And if you're a wealthy person in New York State, your marginal tax rate is over 50% under their plans. And so that's really not something that's going to discourage affluent people from leaving New York State. And I'll tell you, Richard, there's so many middle class people that are leaving New York State. I mean, I have family members that just recently in the last 2 months picked up and moved from Western New York and moved to South Carolina. And part of that was because they had children down there, but part of it was, the cost of living is better. It's easier. And but I think too many people are rushing to say, oh, it's going to be better over there. New York is a pretty damn good place to live, in my view, especially upstate New York. I really do. As a Long Island native who went to high school in Queens, I really do enjoy living in the Upper Hudson Valley. It's a terrific place.
Spectacularly beautiful, first of all.
It's
But
beautiful. Great place to raise kids.
you talked about the provision sunsetting. or not sunsetting? Well, two things. One is that salt, the state, for those of us,
Yeah.
for those people out there who don't know what salt is, no, it doesn't go with pepper. It's state and local taxes, and people get to deduct that. It's going up to $40,000 for people who make 150,000 or less, but then it is going back down again to $10,000 in 2030. So
Right.
you do have that piece of it. So it is going to come down. The thing I
And that
also want.
and that was a political compromise that was meant to, because frankly, there's not a single Republican senator in the US Senate that cared about the SALT deduction. In fact,
It
I
doesn't affect
remember
their states.
doesn't affect their states. I can remember being in a meeting with a Democratic senator and Congress members who were considered, you would say, oh, that's a liberal Democrat. But they're from states which have a much lower state and local tax burden. And you know what they said? They didn't care about this either.
Of
So
course.
it really just depends on where you're from.
It's a
But the
big
thing,
state. It's a big states largely, isn't it? It's the big tax states: New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, California, Illinois. I mean, it's those states that care
yeah,
the most.
it's those states that care the most, without a doubt. And um, it just this is one of those things that it really depends on whose ox is getting gored. But the thing that I come back to, and I think a lot of the proponents of restoring the full deductibility of state and local taxes fail to say, is that before 2017, you had the alternative minimum tax that hit some of these very same people. So if you're a household, say, making $400,000 and you're living in Westchester County and you're paying $40,000 a year in real estate taxes, or 50, okay, which a lot of people are, guess what? The alternative minimum tax took back most of the benefit that you had from SALT, because what the alternative minimum tax did, it forced you to calculate your taxes in a different way, which took away that deduction that you had. And so that was one of the things that was done in the 2017 tax bill. In my district, for instance, I went from having 33% of the taxpayers who itemized their deductions. After the tax bill was enacted, only 8% itemized their deductions. And that's because the standard deduction was raised
It was
in
raised so much.
in
Yeah.
the bill so much. And that's also a feature of the bill they just passed, which is it increases the standard deduction further. And so the need for people to make an itemized deduction is lessened. I acknowledge, if you're in Summit, New Jersey, or Montclair, New Jersey, where my wife grew up, or if you're living in Westchester or Long Island, you still might be better off having a bigger, more hefty SALT deduction.
Right.
And it gets back to one of the things that I said during the 16 years I was in the state assembly, is that New York taxes its people too much and it spends too much. And that was one of the provisions that I got in the 2017 bill, was a provision that would have forced the state to do what most of the other states do, which was not impose the Medicaid burden on local taxpayers outside of New York City. And that was a big deal. And you're seeing now in a lot of the arguments about Medicaid today, we're one of the only states in the country that forces local governments, meaning New York City and the counties, to pay for a share of the state's Medicaid costs. And in fact, back in 2017, when I brought this provision and got it in that reconciliation bill in the House on the health side, and the health bill, that never passed the Senate, when John McCain gave the thumbs down,
Thumbs down. Yeah.
that provision in the entire United States of America, about $10 billion, $10 billion was spent by local governments on Medicaid. $7.5 billion of that $10 billion was spent by local governments in New York State. And it
Wow.
just shows you how out of whack. It was the worst decision Nelson Rockefeller ever made as governor,
To
when
push it down to the locals.
when the state adopted Medicaid in 1966 or 67. It kept this paradigm where they were cost sharing the non-federal share with the county governments and the city of New York. And that is a terrible, just from a political science point of view, what always bothered me about it is that the level of government that confers the benefit, namely the state government saying what the level of benefits for Medicaid would be, that level of government didn't have to go to its citizens and raise the taxes to pay for that benefit, because they could shift part of the
The
burden
local government.
to the local governments, and the local governments have no choice but to pay it.
You raised the issue a little while before about debt. You were one of the first people that I remember to really come out and start talking about the problems of debt for the country in the future, and how much you felt that it was unfair to pass the debt on to future generations. This bill, first of all, increases the debt ceiling by I
By
think about
five
five
trillion
trillion,
dollars.
right?
Yeah.
But it also increases the debt massively over the next 10 years. I think it's over $4 trillion is going to increase the debt.
Well, it nets about 3 trillion supposedly, but
But
these numbers when you
you've always been opposed
yeah,
to increasing the
yeah.
debt. I'm just curious how you feel about that and how that
I don't
in the
feel good
bill.
about it. But one of the things I learned about because frankly neither party right now is addressing the debt and deficits in a serious way.
Well, the
Now,
president's trying to eliminate big swaths of government, I think, is a way to do that, or big
it, it
programs.
it's true, and it's important that this be done. Um, I think that one of the things that I learned on the budget committee in the House of Representatives, which is not a great committee to serve on, by the way, but the thing about
I'm sure no one thanks you. I'm sure no one goes, John, way to go.
no, they don't.
You cut
Well, I
this.
mean, so here's the problem, just big picture. 72% of all federal spending, 72%, and this is true today, it was true, 7 years ago when I was in the House, but 72% of all federal spending is Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare,
And
and
debt.
interest on the debt. That's
Right.
72%. 28% is national defense and everything else, embassies, parks, health, the running the HHS department and the VA and things like that. So 72% is Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and interest, and 28% is defense and everything else. Now, Richard, what side is growing faster, the 72% side or the 28% side?
Well, we know the answer to that one
The answer is
by a long shot.
that's right. It's the 72% side. And
But
so
it's also
really what's
strangling states
so here
because of Medicaid.
well, that's true. And so one of the things that they did do in this most recent reconciliation bill is they tried to you hear the term, oh, they're cutting Medicaid, they're gutting Medicaid, they're destroying Medicaid, they're throwing X number of millions of people off Medicaid. Well, in fact, what they're doing is they're really just slowing the growth of Medicaid, because in 10 years, Medicaid will spend more money than it's spending today. It still will grow. It will not grow as fast. And now the way they've chosen to ratchet down the spending trajectory is to do some reforms and to put a work requirement in for able-bodied people who don't have dependent children or a disabled person at home. And so this doesn't involve throwing grandma out of the nursing home. It involves trying to get people who are able-bodied into the workforce. Now, that is going to be a task that states are going to have. That's a heck of a lot easier said than done. But there are other aspects of what they did in this bill, which frankly, I don't even think Bernie Sanders would oppose. For instance, they have 16 billion that is a savings in this bill, the reconciliation bill, over a 10-year period. I actually think it's probably even double the 16 billion. But CBO says 16 billion. How do they get that savings? They get it because they ensure that states do not pay managed care organizations twice for the same person in different states. The Wall
Well,
Street Journal.
I think we all support getting rid of waste and fraud, but
That is not even, that's just inefficiencies. It's not necessarily done in a fraudulent way. It's because if I'm in New York and I move to New Jersey and I apply for Medicaid in New Jersey, I don't necessarily say to New York, go back to New York and tell them,
sure.
oh, I'm no longer here. Well, the managed care organization is still paying getting paid a capitated rate by the state until 3 or 6 months later, they figure out, oh, that person's no longer here. So one of the things this bill does, it sets up what's called a national accuracy clearinghouse, so that when you apply, you move from New York to New Jersey and you apply in New Jersey has the capacity to check, is Richard Gordon with this Social Security number, is he enrolled in New York or another state? Which they don't do now. Now think about that. They do not do that. So there are a lot of ways. There are certain things that should be done vis-a-vis Medicare, where hospitals are paid a hospital rate when they have an outpatient surgery center or an outpatient clinic. They're paid a hospital-based rate for a setting which doesn't cost them as much. So there are a number of, and that was not done in this bill. So there are a lot of ways in which you can ratchet down, slow the growth. And a lot of this, frankly, is not because it's a Democrat or Republican thing. It's not because of fraud, and it's not because of some pernicious insurer wanting to rip off the system, blah, blah, blah. It's because of demographics. And one of the underlying problems in our country is that we don't have enough young people, and we're not having enough kids.
And we're having a lot of old people.
A lot of people our age.
Right.
And we're the baby boom generation. And so that demographic trend is what's driving the gaps in Social Security. It's what's driving the gaps in Medicare, largely. And so really, if Democrats and Republicans really need to do, a Simpson Bowles kind of thing again and have a consensus. But
which they never passed, though. Congress didn't have the courage to pass it.
That's true, they didn't. But eventually, you're going to be forced. We're going to be forced by the financial reckoning to deal with it. Just in a few years, I plan to still be around in 2033 or 2034. I'm sure you do too.
God willing, sure.
You could have some more political stickers on your shelves behind you by that time. So by 2034, the Social Security actuaries say, and these are actuaries. So these are the bean counters. These aren't partisan things. They're just people telling you what the numbers are. And the numbers say Social Security can only pay 77% of its promised benefits to people in 2033 or 2034. And what's Congress doing? What is everyone in Washington doing? They're basically twiddling their thumbs and pretending I see and hear no evil, and I'm not going to look at it. Now, there are some people like Senator Bill Cassidy. He's proposed something on Social Security financing with Senator Tim Kaine from Virginia, a Democrat and a Republican, to try to create a mechanism to basically set aside resources to fund Social Security going forward. But all of these things are politically difficult. And the problem, as I see it, is that the public is not tuned in on this at all. And unless you have the kind of national leadership saying that here's a problem we need to address and we need to really look at, it's going to be really difficult to get the public to buy in.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. But look, by definition, and I think you went to this a little bit, by changing the rules on Medicaid, people who went on Medicaid because of Medicaid expansion under Obama, for example, a number of them will not receive Medicaid in the future. So by definition, there will be less people. It's a way of dealing with expansion of it, but it did expand the number of people and the ability to get Medicaid.
Yeah, I think the fundamental problem with the ACA, the Obamacare expansion, was the way in which it was funded. It said, okay, states, we give you this incentive. You add these new people that are generally employable adults who are working. You add them to the rolls under the expansion, and we'll reimburse you 90%, and the states only have to pay 10%. Sure. Well, that's a sweet deal if you're a governor or state legislator.
A lot of states didn't take it, though.
Well, I think 10 states didn't take it because they were fearful. They saw what was going to happen financially, and they worried that the federal government would break their 90% funding commitment. So what sense here in New York State, we get 50% of what Medicaid costs from the federal government, and then the feds, the state, and the locals pick up the rest.
Right.
And so, what sense is it that we get reimbursed 50% on the dollar for the old lady in the nursing home, or the young mother with two kids, she's struggling to make ends meet, etc. What sense does it reimburse them 50%, but if you have a single employable adult, and they're above the income threshold you otherwise would qualify for Medicaid, what sense does it make to say, okay, we're going to pay you 90 cents on the dollar for that person? That's the fundamental problem with this. They set up a funding mechanism that's separate and apart from traditional Medicaid, and that's why it's driven up costs exponentially.
I know we have a ton of topics, so let me keep moving. Do you think we're better off 6 months into the Trump administration than we had been? Is the country in a better place?
So here's how I'd say.
And would you have voted for the bill?
I would have voted for this bill. That's correct.
Got it.
Absolutely. Mainly because of the tax provisions.
Right.
And making those tax provisions permanent.
Permanent. Even though the debt, you would have had problems with.
Because the debt, most of that debt expansion is based upon keeping the current tax code as it is. So if you otherwise you'd have to say you'd be in favor of raising taxes on virtually everyone, and you can't just do it by raising taxes on the rich. That get back to my friends on the left will say, "Oh, make the wealthy pay their fair share." Well, the top 5% of taxpayers pay like 40% of the taxes. The top 10% pay 70% of the taxes. And think about this. If you had the government do what Elizabeth Warren and AOC and other people want, which is to create a wealth tax. If you just went in and say, we'll take the 100 richest people in America and we'll just confiscate their money. We'll just take it all away, pretend we're the Soviet Union, or pretend we're, some kind of socialist nirvana, and we'll take their money away. Well, that would get you about $4 trillion, and then that would only pay a portion of the $7 trillion budget that we have now in the United States. And then next year you don't have any of the money. I mean, it's just craziness. I mean, look, I don't want people to evade taxes they owe. I think people should pay taxes that they owe. But here in New York State, we're a high tax state. So if you're at the 37% marginal tax rate because you're wealthy, and then you have to add on, if you live in the city of New York and the state of New York combined, you add on like 14% more on top of that. They're over 50%. So these are crazy, that's confiscatory. And so I'm not saying cut their taxes anymore, but I'm just saying if you go and raise them, you're not going to get the money that you think you are. And every time
leave the state like your relatives.
Well, that's right. And the other piece of it is that you every time I hear one of my friends on the left say, oh, make them pay their fair share, what are they going to do with the money? They're going to spend the extra money. They're not putting it to reduce the deficit. So I think that's really, look, we are spending about 23% of the GDP now in federal revenue. We're spending that. And our tax revenue is only 18.5% of federal GDP. So we're spending 23% of the GDP and we're only getting revenue 18+% of the GDP. And that has to narrow. And frankly, it should narrow in both on revenue, but it should also narrow by making sure people are paying the taxes they owe, et cetera. So, we're not going to be in a deficit neutral position anytime soon, but the best way to reduce the deficit and debt is to grow faster. And that gets back to the demographic issue that I mentioned. That's why we really need to fix immigration, because you're not going to fix, you have to grow faster, and you're not going to grow faster if you have a slow growth population. You've got to grow faster. And that's why I've always been in favor of fixing immigration.
But as you said, we're not having children. So there's only one. So immigration is the only way to do it. And it seems both Democrats and Republicans are incapable of coming up with an immigration system that is fair and decent and honest.
Yeah.
You
Yeah, and
know,
I supported that when I was in Congress, and
right.
I was considered one of the most bipartisan members. I'll never
I was just
forget.
going to
Well,
ask you about that. You were
yeah,
number 18. I looked at a chart that had little dots of every member of Congress when you were there, and you were almost dead center. You were the 18th most bipartisan member of Congress. I guess my question for you is, could John Faso be elected to Congress today? Have we gone too far where our primary system, the gerrymandering, and you have to be so far to the left or so far to the right?
I mean, I think yes, you can. You can be a what I call a common sense conservative and get elected, or a common sense liberal and get elected. But it's increasingly difficult because of the polarization you mentioned. I'll never forget going to a forum that was sponsored by people who I knew weren't my political supporters. And I went to City of Hudson, and we're at the high school, and go to a forum. And at one point, I was talking about an issue, and I mentioned that I was, considered one of the more bipartisan people in Congress. And you know what the reaction of the 150 or so people in the crowd was? They
It,
booed.
I was
They
going to say it should be applause, but I bet it was booze.
they booed, and the reason
Yeah.
is because they don't want someone who considers both sides. They just want someone who decides it their way, the way they want. And that's on the left and the right. And that's an endemic problem that we do have in this country.
So let me also ask you, you really were outspoken a few years ago. I think New York overstepped on the, that's a nice word, on the redistricting
Yeah.
plan. You had someone do it, and then the legislature changed it, and they really pushed it too far. Um, where are you now? Where are you now? I mean, we're hearing that Texas, Trump is pushing Texas to redistrict. Florida might, the vice president is in Indiana today. And then back here, Governor Hochul is talking about doing it, Governor Newsom in California. You really stuck a marker in the sand, I thought, in saying, look, this is a once every 10-year episode. Let's do it once every 10 years. It's wrong to change it in the middle of the game. The
Yeah.
Republican Party wants to change it in the middle of the game. Where are
Well,
you?
this reminds me of how they started World War One. The system of
The Archduke
alliances.
got assassinated?
Yeah, the Archduke got assassinated, and then one shoe dropped after another, and one alliance said, "Well, now they're doing this to us. Now, the Austrians invaded Serbia, and the Serbs were aligned with Russia, and the French were aligned with them, and then the Germans said, "Well, you're doing that. We have to go in there." So, I mean, it was craziness. So that's maybe it's not the right analogy, because war is different than what's going on here. This is political war, which is thankfully less violent. But I think my view is that while Texas law does permit mid-decade redistrictings, I think generally they're unwise. Unless a court is telling you that you've violated some law and your plan needs to be changed, etc. I think once a decade is the rule. And I think to listen to some of these folks, like the governor of Illinois, which has the most egregious gerrymander of any state in the country, pontificating about the Texas Republicans when he just did the same thing in his state after he said he wouldn't do it. And I've heard Governor Hochul. I mean, look, they're not looking too good in their response, because they were complicit in trying to push through the most egregious gerrymander, violating our state constitution in the process. I was one of the leaders behind the litigation that threw out the gerrymander they enacted. But they're not about to listen to me on this, nor probably is anyone else going to listen to me on this. But I just think mid-decade redistrictings are not a good idea. That this kind of thing back and forth. And also, look, I've represented the district in the state assembly and in Congress. And one of the things you really learn is that when constituents have a problem, first they have to figure out, well, who represents them, and can you help them? And if you're moving district lines around a lot, that's going to disorient and confuse a lot of people. So, I mean, I think it's generally a bad thing to do. I don't recommend it. And I think what New York's leaders are talking about now, amending the state constitution so that if any other state does something, whether it's good or bad, we now have the new authority to go in And then they said, well, we want to get rid of the Independent Redistricting Commission, which we know isn't totally independent because it's split 50-50, Democrat and Republican. But at least that process, can work. And I think it would have worked had not the Democrats overplayed their hand last time. They had put an egregious gerrymander in. And because it was so egregious, that's why we were able to throw it out in court.
Well, I also think that's why the Republicans won the House of Representatives. I think it was the districts that were changed that made the such a big swing. But look,
Well, they were going to
this
they
is
were going to
easy.
give they were going to give Republicans 4 seats out of 26
Right.
under their plan. When we won the lawsuit and a special expert was appointed by the judge to draw the lines, we won 11 seats out of 26.
Right.
And that did make the difference in terms of the House of Representatives in the 22 election.
Yeah, the
What
overstepping here made a huge difference.
And
Huge.
what's the old saying? Um, pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered.
That's slaughtered, exactly.
And they were hogs.
But the president could end this tomorrow. He just has to tell Governor Abbott to stop. I don't want you to do this. Stop. Now he's calling for a new census, which obviously has never been done. So
I don't know
I
how
want to be
I don't know
very
how that I don't know how that happens. Look, I understand where the president's coming from. He wants the last 2 years of his term, he wants to maintain control of the House. I think we can maintain control of the House just by going out there and running good candidates and winning elections. I mean, I
was going to say,
think that's the best way to do it. But I also think the utter hypocrisy of folks like Governor Pritzker in Illinois. I mean, look at the Wall Street Journal editorial yesterday, in fact, where they had the map of those districts in Illinois. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, I think Trump got 47% of the vote in Illinois, and Republicans have like 20% of the districts. So it's
well, I think there's enough hypocrisy on both parties to go around for the next years. But look, I agree with you. Good
at
policy.
At least through the next census.
Yeah, I think good policy is going to make good politics. I know you've got to run. I want to be sensitive to your time. Can I ask you a couple really
Sure.
quick questions?
Yeah.
One, can a Republican win the governorship in New York? Hasn't happened since
Yes, it can.
2002, right?
Yeah. Since 1994, when George Pataki was elected.
Three times.
Yeah, 3 times. And I do think that the crime, economy, and taxes are the big issues, the outmigration of people from the state. And I think also the Democrats are putting themselves in a very tricky political situation in the mayoral race in New York City.
Just about to ask you about that. What do you think?
Well, I think Mandami is likely to win. I think it's 80 or 90% likely to win at the present stage. He articulates a easy to understand message. Although I'm reminded of what Margaret Thatcher famously said, that the only trouble with socialism, eventually you run out of other people's money. And I think if he's mayor, he's going to find that out quickly. But I think it's going to put a lot of Democrats in a very, very difficult position. There'll be a lot of internal fights and squabbles and primaries. And I think that sets up the possibility of a Republican win in 2026. But, I think you win in New York by talking about those issues, affordability, taxes, crime, education. Mamdani he's against charter schools. Here's a guy who's a product of elite schools, Bowdoin College, some elite grammar school in the city, high priced, went to Bronx High School of Science. Obviously, he was a smart guy to get in there. But here he is saying he's against charter schools, which about 125,000 mostly poor minority kids in New York City. And I was the original sponsor of charter schools in New York State in the legislature. And I was minority leader when we passed them in 1998 under Governor Pataki. And frankly, we need more competition in K through 12 education. And I think this is an issue where Republicans, if they get out there and talk about this issue, they can win votes in places that they haven't won them before, because people care. The most thing that people care about is they care about their families, that they care about their safety, and they care about their kids
And the future of their children.
and their future of their children. And for a guy, a silver spoon elitist like Mamdani to come along and say he's against charter schools giving choice and opportunity that his parents were able to give him because they had the money, I just find that unbelievably hypocritical.
I think it's interesting.
It's worse than redistricting hypocrisy.
It's interesting how many Democrats don't understand how this plays in the minority community. Because when I've been looking at this for 20 years and I find it fascinating, and I didn't understand it at first, but in the minority community, it is from what I've seen, it's overwhelming support because they see it as a chance for their children to get ahead. So we'll see how that plays out. Two quickies. Future of the Republican Party. Is it going to be MAGA, or is it going to return to the type of Republican that you are?
Well, I mean, I think that it probably is going to be a little bit of both. I think it's going to be a bit more populist than it has been in the past. But I think fundamentally it comes down to, on the national level, I think it comes down to strong defense, fiscal responsibility, and protecting the homeland. Really, really, really important to me. And at the state level, I mean, I think again, it's crime, it's taxes, and it's education. Those are the things that Republicans need to emphasize, because I think those are the things that are most saleable to the most people in the state, and also, by the way, would be most beneficial to the people of the state.
I ask almost every politician who's ever been on the show the same question. I've been asking this question of politicians for 30 years because I find their response fascinating. You unfortunately have had experience in this. What's so bad about losing? What's so bad about going out? We talked about this at the top of the show. What's so bad about going out there and John Faso has an idea and Richard Gordon has an idea and they pick the Faso idea? What's so wrong about that? Why do politicians just react so viscerally and are so afraid to lose? They're so afraid to lose, they're afraid to lead. I'm curious your thoughts.
I totally agree. And because I've lost both of my statewide elections. I won one for Congress and I lost one. And you don't like to lose, obviously. It's very unhappy when you lose, but at the same time, life goes on. The most important thing is your family and your faith and your community, and I have all those things. I'm very lucky, and I really hated losing. I still hate losing, but at the same time, life goes on, and frankly. I have a strong belief in our system. I really do. And in the Constitution and the privileges that we have as Americans. And I think that's something we've gotten a little away from, and we need to inculcate that with our children so they understand how blessed we are. We're going to celebrate the 250th anniversary of our country next year. And I'm reading the Rick Atkinson trilogy of the American Revolution. That's an outstanding read. I'm into the second book right now, and I think we should all be thankful that we're born here, but we also have an obligation to continually try to make it better, and we have a lot of work to do.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end. Congressman, friend, John Faso, thank you very much for being on Unconventional Times. I appreciate it. And as I say to my guests, please stay unconventional. So thank you for being on today.
Thank you.
That was really interesting and a really interesting conversation. And I think one of the things we take out of this conversation today is that politics doesn't need to be so polarized or so partisan. And, today's guest, Congressman John Faso, has shown throughout his entire career that you could be effective and you could still be bipartisan. They're not mutually exclusive. You can do both. And we should all do a little better at that. And I actually think we could all do a little better if more of our elected officials were like our guest today. So I really appreciate him coming on. So listen, thanks for joining us here at Unconventional Times. You could find us wherever you get your podcasts. I've been told I need to say you should like us and repost us, so please do. And you could also watch us on YouTube. YouTube at UT-Richard Gordon. That's YouTube at the initials UT-Richard Gordon. Thank you very much for joining us today. Look forward to seeing you next time.
You've been listening to Unconventional Times with your host, Richard Gordon. Check out all of the episodes of Unconventional Times on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. To learn more about Richard Gordon and all of his unconventional conversations, head on over to unconventionaltimes.com. Thanks for listening.